Hello everybody, welcome to MonteyCodes, and in this video I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the tools that you're going to need to be able to follow along with my programming tutorials. So we will mainly be using macOS, and some of the applications we'll be using is React Expo and TypeScript. And in the description below you'll see a link to this site, Psychic Guacamole. And when you click it, you'll come to my GitHub page, which talks about some of the tools that you'll be using. In this video, I am making the assumption that you already have Homebrew installed coming from a Mac OS system, but if not, that's okay because I also have a video on how to install Homebrew and how to take care of some of the little configuration issues that may come up with using it. Now, I do have two videos. Like I said, this one's called Psychic Guacamole, and the other one's called Yarn Guacamole. No, not Yarn Guacamole. It's called Ideal Guacamole, but it's using Node Package Manager to install Yarn instead of Homebrew. But let's go ahead and talk about this one here. And in this one, I talk about the purpose of the Z shell, why we use it, Yarn versus Homebrew, and why we use NPX instead of global installations, why this is the preferred method now. But let's go ahead and click this one. And here we go. Like I said, I'm making the assumption that you already have Homebrew, but I do have a video on that. So we will need Node.js because we'll be using React, Expo, and TypeScript, which basically TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. And so we will need that. And after you install that, you want to make sure and verify that you have the correct versions. We will be using the latest stable versions. I believe it's 21 or 22. We won't go any further than that. I know 18 was a very common one, but that one's being phased out. But mostly, and unless it's specifically needed, we will be using the latest. Anyways, next we will be using Yarn, Yarn with Homebrew. Some people prefer just using one or the other. I like to use them both, and I'll show you an example of the differences between the two in a little bit. But here you install it, the command for install it, verify the version of this. That's what -v means, Yarn version. Whenever you're installing npm tools, like a Yarn or any other things, be careful with installing it in your root. You may run into some permission issues, and you'll have to make some adjustments, some commands, maybe some configurations, and it can be troublesome, but not entirely impossible to fix. It just takes a little extra time. And here, as I was mentioning, why we are choosing to go this route, NPX, versus the global install. You can still do it, but it's just not the preferred and recommended way anymore. If you want more documentation on why this is not the preferred method, here's a link to the documentation of Expo dev site. Other than making more of a cleaner code and architecture based sort of things, without going too much into that, it's just the preferred way to go. And since we will be using React Expo to build our multi-platform apps, we will need both IDEs, the Xcode Integrated Development Environment. Of course, you'll get that from the Apple App Store. This is the command to make sure that you have the command line tools installed. You will need that. You may not need this command. You may, but if you do, I just run it again to make sure that it's installed in the terminal. If it is installed, it'll tell you, oh, these tools are already installed, and then you don't need to proceed, but you will need those. And then, of course, you can just go onto the Google site, or here's the link, download the Android Studio IDK, and you're going to need the softwares for the emulators, command line tools, and the software development kits. And yeah, you will need to know the location for this. I do touch a little bit on this in my videos on Xcode and Android Studio of how to add extra simulators for Xcode and emulators for Android Studio. I show you how to get that, but here's a little way to get it to know the location on that, because you need to know for VS Code, since that will be the editor of my choice and that we'll be using for all the videos. Yeah, there's others, there's Sublime, there's Atom. Some prefer to go very old school and use Vim, but I don't. I just use VS Code, and that's my preference. But anyways, they need to know the path. Your editors need to know where exactly to look for the software development kit, and that's the next file that you're going to need, the Z shell. Again, it's an alternative bash. It's again preference. Some people like to they love to use bash. I use Z shell. And here's how to create that file. If you don't already have it, this command creates it. This opens up the text editor. You will copy and paste these commands in here, basically telling, as I said, VS Code, where to look for the software development kit, where to look for the emulators, the tools, and the, etc. on that. You can just click save, or you can use this command to save it. This command here is to see what emulators that you have on there. When you first set up Android Studio, it just comes up with a very general, generic emulator. In my video, I show you how to add more emulators to it, and once you do that, you can see that after you run these commands. And then before I go on to this, one of the things that I always like to do after I set up Android Studio and Xcode is just to do a very simple test application. They usually have the default of a hello world ready to go on that, and it's basically just to verify that that the studio or the Xcode itself is up running, and that the simulators or emulators are functioning, and that you have code going to being sent to the emulator simulator, and it'll say like, oh, hello world or hello Android or something like that. I always like to do that, make sure at least on this side of it that it's functioning before I start bringing in code from VS Code to be able to call the emulators and simulators from those IDEs. And this one right here creates a simple little version of a hello world called my app, and this dash is for T's for template. We'll be using blank TypeScript templates. So when you paste this command, it'll ask you what template that you want to use. You also might see a little command or little suggestion on there that you need to install Expo. Just click yes on that. Click TypeScript, blank TypeScript as your selection, and then you need after you create that, change into the directory, and then click do npx expo start to start up the server. So that way you can choose. I know I is for iOS and A is for Android emulators, and that way you can run and make sure that that the software is able to communicate with both things. The VS Code is able to communicate with Xcode and Android Studio. Now this may happen from time to time, but you may not run into this. Just as similar as with Android needing to know, VS Code needing to know the path for the Android software. Sometimes if you have issues during your Xcode installation, you may need to also manually set the path on there, and so here's the commands for that. That's why I was suggesting that it's best to, after you install Xcode, to run an Hello World default kind of a program to make sure that everything's functioning, or that some files aren't missing. If you have an error in your Xcode installation, then you might come up to this problem. Again, you may come up with it, but not. But if you do, this is the process to be able to take care of that. And then let's go to the other side, ideal guacamole. Let's see if it's gonna take me there. No, that's back there. Let's go back to ideal guacamole. And this is yarn. if you're basically using a Windows operating system to follow along with this tutorial, it's fine, but you will run into some issues, of course, with iOS development because you will need an iOS, meaning a Mac machine, to be able to do that. But if you just want to strictly do Android development, you can, because Homebrew is specifically for Mac operating systems that I'm aware of, because I mostly use Mac operating systems. But if you want to use Yarn, you can install it using Node.js. And so let's go ahead and click this one right here. Internet's running slow today. And you can, like I said, not just that you can't do this also on Mac OS. It's just to me, I find it easier to use both Yarn and Homebrew together side by side. It just makes installations of certain packages and other tools that you'll need for the applications a lot better, in my opinion. But for this side, go to the site Node.js. And it has a simple installer, GUI kind of box installation kind of a thing. It's very simple. Click all the defaults. You won't need any special configurations. If you ever do, I will tell you. And then verify the versions here. Same thing, npm install, global yarn, verify it. And then again, this is where it's especially important to be careful not to install this in your root because you will come up with some permissions. Now, if you absolutely have to, like I said, you can, but it can cause, I'm not saying definitely will cause, but it will cause some issues with permissions, and then you just have to make some adjustments after that, and it just makes life easier not to do it in my opinion. And then again, this is not the recommended way to do it anymore. Use npx expo start. Again, you can do it. It's just not recommended, not preferred. However, as I stated before, if you want further documentation on why, you can click that link and explore for yourself. And here again, we will need the two IDEs, Xcode, Android Studio. Here's that Z shell. You will still need that. The command paths on here. Save it. Same command again for your emulators. And here's that hello world package again. And like I stated, press I for iOS simulators. You can do Shift I, so that way you'll see a list of all the emulators and all the simulators for I. Shift A for all the emulators for Android Studio. And here's a little link. I don't think I have that on the other side, but there's a link on here to basically talk about how to set those up. And this is also that same path issue that if you run into it with Xcode. And let me see what else I can come up to. Difference, yeah, let's go ahead and touch this. Yarn is basically a JavaScript package manager. It was created by Facebook. Serves as an alternative Node package manager. And then Homebrew's package manager for Mac OS, Linux. So I go into that, and then I talk about the differences and how they work together. Do you have to use both? No. Again, it depends on what you're needing. For me, yeah, it just, to me, it makes life easier to just use them both in tandem together than rather choosing one or the other. But again, I do not believe that they have Homebrew or anything like that for the Windows side. I'm just not very familiar. I mostly use for Mac OS for all my development and everything else, and then occasionally use maybe Windows machines on the VM to test out applications. But and the best practices, and then such tools. Yep, you can alternative on your workflow. And then I talk about the Z shell. This is the same thing for Second Guacamole, and what's basically what it is, what it does, the sample kind of little thing right there. Pro tips, CLI, And then here's the Expo. Why we use this versus that. Project flow workflow. Why use this versus that kind of a thing. Uh, let's see. Consider global so repeated local use. Uh, as you can see, just basically talks a little bit brief history. If you want to know specifics or if you run into any issues, just leave a comment in the below the description, and I'll try to get to your questions as soon as possible. But that's about it. It's just very basic installation that I wanted to basically talk about what tools you'll need to be able to follow along. Um, and that's about it. So, again, like I said, if you have any questions or if you wondered why don't I use this tool versus this tool, just give me a comment on that, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you and tell you my likes and dislikes of using certain programs or certain different frameworks or something like that. But that's about it. Like I said, hope you have a good day. Bye.